Welcome to the Thought Balloons podcast. I am your host, Jeff Folsham, and with me today is someone who I've admired their work for a very, very long time, probably going on 6 years, 7 years now. Got introduced to his work on the Roll20 website through many, many battle maps and gaming tokens. Welcome to the show, Gabriel Pickard.
Howdy, howdy. Happy to be here.
So I know I mentioned to you, and I've tweeted at you a few times, but I have come to search your name specifically when looking for maps and other, set pieces and things. When I'm playing games on Roll20. And I found your stuff very quickly back in like 2014, 2015, somewhere around there. And you very quickly became my go-to source of tabletop artwork. I have a few questions. First is, how did you get into doing like the top-down map kind of like artwork?
Like most people who do the role-playing map thing, I got started from my own games, and eventually, I wanted to do more of it. And at some point, I decided the only way I could do enough of it to satisfy me was to do it as a profession. So
nice.
I looked at what I could do to make that happen. But it was definitely, my own games were the inspiration. My earliest maps look like a lot of bad clip art stamps on weird backgrounds.
I think we've all been there. Have you done much like studying of things from the top-down perspective? Because one thing that like keeps me coming back to your art instead of doing my own, because I don't know if you know, but like I'm a comic book artist, right? Like I'm an artist, but I cannot for the life of me like make things look convincing from the perspective of like right above looking down. And I think that's something that you do like immaculately. It's so good.
I got some of my start on doing like digital art rather than just, traditional media on, what was that thing called? It was a virtual reality setting. I'm blanking on the name now, though. It was a giant open world setting with like no game or anything. I can't remember what it was.
Minecraft?
Nah, blanking on the name of it. But at any rate, I was doing a bunch of modeling for that, like 3D modeling. So
okay,
my entry into some of the digital art came specifically from modeling, and that's all about being able to like picture objects from any given perspective. So that was helpful for that.
Right.
So effectively, I didn't know I was training for doing 2D art at the time I was doing 3D art, but it worked out well for me as an unintentional skill.
Yeah. That's sort of like when I studied film, it kind of applies to comics, and I didn't realize like that would be how I utilize those skills. It's interesting. I haven't really done much 3D stuff.
Yeah, some of the crossover between skills is not where you expect to find it.
Right.
I brought a bunch of skills over from my original career, which was, chefing, which, chefing related to 3D art related to 2D top-down maps. Somehow it works. But a lot of the way you choose workflow, how you decide to organize your day, and a lot of that stuff is very helpful, actually, as well as
Interesting.
just,
So
hand
it's
skills.
yeah, so it's more of like the sort of organizational and sort of like setup stuff. I was
Yeah.
like, I was trying to think like, do you draw a lot of like kitchen items in like your map? I was like, is that what it was? Like, but okay, setting up like a good workflow. Yeah, I can see how that would be really important in the chef kind of world as well. I know it's something that it took me a while to kind of like nail down a good sequence of work for my own art, but yeah, having a system in place is very, very important, I think.
Yeah,
Getting a job
it's
done.
extremely valuable, and it's one of those things that isn't obvious when you get started. People see artwork and they figure, well, what's needed is the skill at producing that art, the, techniques and other things. They don't think of, the ability to execute may be literally related to your ability to create a workflow that allows you to execute the piece. So it's one of
Yeah,
those understated parts of the work.
there's that old saying, good is better than perfect, but done is better than good. And having systems in place to actually do the work and get it finished is very, very important.
I've always heard that the perfect is the enemy of the good.
Yeah, that's another version of that. um how did you get started, like not just in tabletop art, but like just were you an artist in general, or was it a product of the gaming that got you into doing art?
I've always been an art dabbler. I've done tons and tons of different types in an extremely amateur way, which amateur art is always lots of fun. I've done pottery, stained glass, uh, carving, a few other weird ones here, there, and everywhere. Not well, but anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. And it's just lots of fun to pick up weird little skills.
Yeah.
So that was my background. I've always drawn and done other things. And eventually, and now I wanted my game art to be more fun. So I got better at that part specifically. And that led me into the digital art realm, which was a new and interesting one for me.
Yeah, digital art for me has been something that I was originally like, I don't know, not against it, but sort of just like, yeah, I really like inking and working with like actual like ink and paper and stuff. But once I got into like freelancing and stuff, like the digital was more of a like, simply because it's faster, like is
Yeah.
sort of where I am now. And now now that I've like acquired like the tools and things to make my digital art look more real, as far as like, paper bleeds and paper textures and things like that, little tricks to visually make it look like it was done traditionally, I don't think I'm gonna go back.
There's a real joy in doing certain things by hand. It's just not always the most fun in the professional sense. I still like to hand draw people cards, and there's,
Mhm.
a lot of pleasure in the feel of, a pen on paper and such. But that's best done for a leisure time activity. It's not great for, the speed of production that's usually necessary to make art profitable.
Right, yeah. So I was interested in like glass work back before I like even thought of art as a career. But I never got into it. I'm really interested in kind of learning more about the process of how stained glass is made. Do you just make each individual piece and then like paint the glass, or do you actually color the glass as you're like forming each piece?
The stained glass is fun. You cut them out. You get big sheets of various colored glass, whatever colors you need. And if you don't even ever get into stained glass making, go into a stained glass shop and just look at the sheets of glass they have. They have the most incredible colors, patterns, and everything else that are just, various different dyes and other things poured in while they're making the glass. And it's just a true joy to look at it. So you cut out each little piece from a giant sheet. It's also one of the things that tells you whether someone actually has made stained glass or it's just painted on the glass, which is a different technique. I can't remember the name for that, because the hardest thing to do are inside corners, because you have to get it to break, and breaks generally want to travel a straight line, so you score it and then you try to get it to break along the score. But inside corners are notorious for continuing in a straight line through your corner.
I can see how that would definitely be an issue.
Yeah, then you grind off the extra edges. You put basically metal tape along all the edges and solder it all together.
Cool.
It's a fun process.
Interesting. I never knew that you actually used colored glass. I just kind of assumed that it was like painted on top, because I think when I was a kid, I think we made like painted glass like ornaments or something in like school, like for like a Christmas project or whatever, and it was just like a translucent paint that you like painted on to a pre-made like glass ornament, and I sort of just assumed that that's how it was done.
I remember something similar to that, where you basically took this stuff that beat it up to make the parts that are supposed to look like the lines between the glass, and then you just kind of pool filled the colors in, but to each of those little sections. We did that when I was a kid, and it was always fun.
Yeah. So do you are you currently playing like games, or and like still making art for your own games, or has the like production schedule of like making art kind of like taken over everything?
Well, it did for a little bit. I'm thankfully in a couple of games now. One with a good friend that I've known since high school, who I found again online, which is part of the wonderful part about online gaming, is you can find your scattered friends across the country.
Yeah.
And the other one I do for my niece, nephew, and a rotating cast of their friends.
Oh, that's cool. I haven't gotten into like DMing for younger relatives quite yet. I think my nephew's like only 3 or maybe going on 4 this year. So he's not quite ready to like hop into gaming quite yet.
Yeah, it's a little easier. Mine are like 11 and 13, so a little more within the age of reason for that. I'm not sure what you do for a 5-year-old. I'm pretty sure that looks a little more like free play than most organized games.
Yeah,
it works
that's
out
sort of
well.
how I got started in like long road trips. So I'm in PA in Pennsylvania, and we used to go to South Carolina for like summer vacations when I was a kid. And during those like 13-hour car rides, when I was like 5, 6, 7 years old, my mom and I used to do sort of just basically free role play kind of things, like make up superheroes and do like a sentence or two kind of back and forth storytelling. No dice or anything, but that's sort of like what got me interested in gaming in general. I would think for kids of that age, probably the same. And then once you start learning math, you can start like adding dice and rules to like make learning math fun, probably.
Yeah, it's definitely the math part pays off, and the way of basic math skills and ability to do it quickly. That also help for various things in kitchen work, the ability to do math quickly in my head. You're really good at that. I've only been practicing for 10 years as a kid playing role-playing games.
So did you start playing then when you were like really young as a kid? I didn't start until I was in college.
I probably started when I was 13, but those early games, whether that counts, because usually what you're doing looks at least several steps sideways from the actual thing, as your ability to read and comprehend is not fully there yet. But it
Right.
looked cool, so I kind of made up my own version of it, as you do when you're a kid, and do that
Yeah.
until you learn the actual right way to do later on. Not that there's any wrong way to play games and have fun with your friends, but it helps if you're all viewing the same kind of game.
Right. Yeah. It is definitely more difficult when one person is like really heavy into like the play acting and another person is more just into the like strategic combat simulations and things, and they don't really mesh well together.
Sometimes it works out, and you can, it depends on whether you can form a sharing economy where you let the people that like the center stage in the different parts, feel like they have center stage for the part they like. And that can work out. Other times it's just the person that's not into that part just looks deeply bored while it's happening.
Right. Yeah. I definitely I think as I've grown older, it's been easier to come by a sort of balance in those things. But I definitely know that as a first time DM, I know for a fact I fell into that sort of trap of this is the thing that I'm interested in. And I always kind of like focused more on that without really picking up on the clues of the players who were like maybe not as interested in the exploration and role playing part, and we're just like, we haven't fought a monster this session yet.
It's a fun learning process, though. Like all learning processes, sometimes you look back and you question what you were thinking.
Yeah, I definitely question what I was thinking stepping into the role as DM without ever having played as a player before. That was certainly interesting. And that was like before the like vast like boon of content of in the role playing field that we have these days. Like
Oh yeah.
people who want to just jump in and be a DM these days, you've got, Critical Role, you've got Acquisitions Incorporated, Dimension 20, just to name a few, and then all the other like actual play things that you can watch how a game is actually played, right? Like I I think Acquisitions Incorporated had done 2 audio podcasts in like 2008 and 2009. I think they had like the first one out when I started learning how to DM, but I mostly was like reading the Dungeon Master's Guide and like some blogs that I found online about how it all worked, and it was just sort of like a stumbling through the dark trying to figure it out as I went along. Man, I almost wish I had those like things to kind of not model myself after, but just like to have the confidence, I guess, because it was such a just always second guessing myself for like the first 5 years. Like, am I doing this right?
Yeah. Back in the dark ages, things are much better now.
Yeah.
I feel very happy for the newer GMs and whatnot, all of which have, so many better resources. I'm sure that's part of the reason for the continuing boom in it too, is that, there's more resources to make it more fun for everyone involved.
Yeah.
Because
And
it's definitely not one of the cases of things were better back in my day. things were a lot worse back in my day. Now they're better for everyone. And everyone can have a
Yeah.
lot more fun than we used to have the option to have.
Yeah, and I definitely think with the sort of expansion into the sort of mainstream and how accessible everything is with like hundreds, thousands of YouTube channels and Twitch streams all devoted to this kind of stuff. I know it still like exists, but I feel like the gatekeeping kind of aspect of like older generations of gamers is kind of like starting to go away, which I'm really really happy about as well.
But they try to keep some gates. Unfortunately, with the current amount of territory contained in said fences makes it indefensible.
Mhm,
There's too
exactly.
many gates in too many places. The whole thing into the mainstream too is kind of interesting because the fact that there's all this mainstream activity also allows even less mainstream ideas and other things to get some play too. I love seeing all the new role-playing games and other things with less pure European fantasy and instead
Mhm.
various indigenous groups getting role-playing games made for, their particular original fantastic settings and such. That's just an absolute joy to see too.
Yeah, that is really cool. I like the variety. Like, okay, so speaking of variety, I'm on various like Facebook groups, forums, I've Reddit subthreads. And something that I see all the time is how do I turn D&D into X, Y, or Z property, like whether it's Star Wars or Avatar, The Last Airbender or Dragon Ball Z or whatever. And like, what is your feeling about that kind of game mashups when there are actual other systems that exist for those properties?
Uh, I have, various feelings as far as some of it's great. I think people get a little caught up sometimes on system when, there's a million systems, there's systems that are better or worse. But in my experience, the number one thing that makes any system fun or bad is the people you're playing with,
Yeah.
GM included. So if everyone knows, D&D and you have, half your group refuses to learn anything else because they do not enjoy reading gaming books and learning the new math, so be it. You can do that. You can make it work. There may be better options, but as long as everyone's having fun, you can criticize, whichever system is currently on top is definitely going to take some heat for, being annoyingly present at all times. Can we play something
Yeah.
else? This system would work way better. I refuse to learn a new system. You know, I'm only going to play this. Oh, okay. I've played, dozens of different systems and sometimes no system at all or a weird homebrew system. And I never found it to be the single most important part of the game was the system.
Yeah, that's fair. I think I'm sort of in the middle. Like on the one hand, as someone who started out as, GMing and only knowing D&D and coming across rules that I was like, I don't really like this. Let's alter it a little bit, right? Like right from the jump, like I definitely enjoy the homebrew and like the system breaking, if you want to call it that, like and forcing it to do something. But then on the other hand, like I also like one of my first gaming groups, there was like I guess like my second like really solid group. I was a DM and then there was like two other guys who were also like game masters and we were playing a bunch of different systems like week to week, right? Like one week I'd be running, some D&D and then Carl would be running Legend of the Five Rings and then the next week, someone else would be running another game, right? And so from that perspective, I usually encourage people to try a new system just because like I know that there's like especially if there's something really close to Dungeons and Dragons, I think WotC even put out like a Star Wars game sort of built around the D&D rules at one point. Um, but yeah, I definitely think it's an interesting kind of thing about how people are constantly online asking, how do I make D&D do this other thing?
It gets definitely distinctly weird at times, but so be it.
And I also think
I've
part of it is the fun of it is like figuring it out on your own too, you know?
Yeah, if you want something pre-made, why not get a different thing that's already pre-made just to do it?
Yeah. To this day, I'm still trying to figure out how to make a Green Lantern character in D&D. And one of the things that I haven't like really just it's not satisfying enough because all of like the summon and conjuration spells are spread out across like a bunch of different classes. There's like you can't just be like a conjuration wizard and have access to all the different conjuring and summoning spells, which is really weird.
There's that's why you make your own, as you say. But
Yeah.
it can get definitely distinctly weird, and you're always not always sure whether you're doing something balanced or not.
But yeah,
I've
so
played a
speaking
couple different like systems, like there's heroes, champions, and GURPS. I'll do superheroes pretty well if I remember right.
Yeah, I got into this like reading and like messing around with GURPS earlier this year. I haven't yet played an actual game. I've made a couple of characters. Um, Comic schedule keeps me like real busy, and I just haven't been able to like find the time to like squeeze in the game, even though they're like I have a game master willing to do it and like one other person excited to play. We just haven't been able to like make the time work, but we were like aiming for more of like a kind of like a cowboy bebop like space western kind of thing
Nice.
for that. But as far as like superhero stuff, I've played Mutants and Masterminds.
See, that's one
um
of the few I haven't played. So yeah,
I really like it. I recommend that to people. I recommend it not just as like a superhero game, but as a just like if you're interested in playing a genre of game that doesn't really lend itself well to having a quote unquote class, you know?
yeah.
Because I mean, if you're familiar with it, the way Mutants and Masterminds works is very similar to how GURPS works in that you just have like a list of skills or like in this case like power fragments, you know, and you can describe it however you want, right? Like the damage from a laser gun in Mutants and Masterminds works the same as a damage from like your sonic scream or something that breaks somebody's eardrums, and you can just like add like little tweaks and stuff to it, but the main like effect is it's just damage, right? And then modifications from there with like your own sort of tags on top to like flavor it the way your character would produce those effects. And there's the only thing I haven't figured out how to do is exact one-to-one vampiric healing where like you do damage and then heal for that specific amount. The way I've figured out how to do it is you doing damage procs a healing effect. So it's like maybe you'd heal for as much as you did damage, maybe not, but still, that's about the only thing I haven't figured out how to do in that game, which I think is pretty good.
Sounds like a nicely versatile system for the superhero genre.
Definitely, definitely. And especially if you like DC characters, they have the DC Adventures like version of it, which is basically Mutants and Masterminds, but with a paint a coat from DC Comics, which is pretty cool.
I like I like points buy systems where basically anything you put on top of it is window dressing.
Yeah.
It does the thing. What does it look like? Whatever you like. that part hardly matters. That's not part of the mechanics, so you don't need to worry
Mhm.
about it.
Yeah, I've taken to playing D&D the same way. It's just like, okay, so I think the thing I tell my players is like, if you want to play a pyromancer and all you want to do is fire stuff, cool. You can redescribe your spells as fire. The only caveat I put on it is like, if you're gonna redescribe, chain lightning as chain fire blast or whatever, like I just don't want my players on a whim choosing a new like spell like damage type, because that can get a little finicky when you realize like, oh no, my pyromancer, that thing's immune to fire. Okay, well I'm gonna use all my spells like the original way. That could get a little, I don't know, it seems like against the spirit of it.
You
But
get to
other
choose
than
one.
yeah, well yeah, that's basically what I tell my players is like, when you take a spell, feel free to describe it however you want, but then like that's kind of how it works for you. Just like, a wizard casting fireball, the way it is out of the book is it's going to be like that every time they cast fireball. So, yeah. But yeah, as far as like damage types and like what a spell looks like, even in D&D, I've gone more of the like, yeah, whatever, whatever you want. I'm cool. If it fits your character concept, then and you're having fun, then
When it
go
doesn't
for it.
change much mechanically, why make it so that someone can't have the fun their own way, especially when it doesn't interfere with other people's fun?
Exactly. Yeah. So I mentioned earlier about like getting started as a DM, and I have to assume that through like doing artwork and stuff that probably came out of you being a DM. Have you ever suffered the like forever DM curse where like you're always stuck as the DM because nobody else wants to DM?
Uh, yeah, sometimes. I was fortunate though that in my longest term group there was two of us, so we would take turns whenever one of us burned out. So it was always I'm not in the mood this week. I don't have anything prepared. Do you want to go? Sure. We'll go back to yours. There was several years in there that I did it almost exclusively, as as various groups come and go, and I move at various points across the country in different directions. So, but I never really minded that. I love world building, so I never mind being the GM for that reason alone. Give me more world building. Giant sandbox style games, just an excuse to make more of this world.
Yeah, I definitely can relate with that. I think a sort of East Marsh, or is it West Marshes? I can never remember which is the correct term, but like the West Marches kind of style of game where like you have the home base and then you go out in a random direction and like stumble across a thing and develop a sort of ad lib style kind of episodic adventure, where maybe there isn't a big bad evil guy that you meet in like episode 3 and defeat when you're level 23 years later.
So sometimes you can just let the players create their own enemies. They'll do it for you if you let it. You
They
give them,
do. I
much
was
impetus at all.
I think I was on Twitter or maybe it was like Reddit the other day. I saw someone ask, it was like a thread about like how do you create good red herrings in D&D? And I was like, you don't. You just let the players convince themselves that something is more important than it actually is. Like I've had so many times where a player will just pick up for some reason, and I still haven't figured out what it is, but like they'll just pick up on like a random like piece of set dressing or like a description of a thing that I said, just off the cuff in the moment, and then they're like, oh, this is like a big thing. And like it's like, no, just a random thing that I said, but you're going down this rabbit hole. So, okay, like have fun, and
The
I
the
try and
dangers of describing anything too well. I should make this game immersive, so I should describe things. Oh no, I gave too long a description. They think it's a thing now. Uh-oh.
Right.
Yes, the,
Exactly.
the decoration on the wall is super important to the story somehow. It's not just a description to make you feel like you're in this ancient place that has a story behind it. Oops. Well, here we are.
Yeah, there was I mean, that very specific thing has happened to me where I was describing like we went into like an old cairn, and I was describing sort of like this mural. I think it was like I think it was even more than a triptych. I think it was like a 7 panel painting. And I basically said it was like the describing like, the life and times of like this Viking or, Viking-esque barbarian hero of old that was in this tomb. And I like called out like a few panels, and then like people were like, I'm gonna study this painting for like information about this. I was like, oh man, you were just supposed to go in here and open the sarcophagus and like fight a mummy, and then take his axe and move on or whatever. Oh, why do you make me come up with more things?
The dangers of details.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I enjoy it. Like, I enjoy the ad-libbing, but sometimes like it's just you get stuck. you know it can be interesting, the sort of things that you come up with like on the fly. um
That is
but
part of the joy, is the mental athletics of it all.
yeah, I mean, and then talking about how like sometimes you have skills that like grow in s- interesting places. Having had to do that so many times over the years has prepared me to run some like powered by the apocalypse games where you play to find out, like there's a game, Brindlewood Bay. I don't know if you've heard of it, but for any listeners who haven't heard about this game, it's basically Murder She Wrote meets Golden Girls. It's like old ladies solving murder mysteries, and even the DM doesn't know who the actual culprit is. And I just have you just have like a list of suspects, and you have a list of clues, and when the characters roll well enough to find a clue, you look at the list of clues and you're like, okay, well, this one seems like it would be a good fit here. And you say something like, you find a notebook, and it may say like, and on the last page it says, um that the murdered person had a beef with one of the other suspects. And I'm not even saying that in a generality because I don't remember specifics. That is like something very specific that game would say. The murdered person had a beef with one of the suspects, and then you wait until the deliberation part at the end to assign a value to one of the suspects, right? And you can like choose at the end like who that person was that the murdered person had beef with, to like kind of make the theory fit. And it's really interesting, but a lot of that game is just ad-libbing and describing things on the fly, and it's
I've played a
really
fair
fun.
bit of Dungeon World that's,
Hmm.
strongly related to that same system. So I like the aspect of just make it up as you go along. Okay, I can do that.
Yeah, it
I've
makes
made up 1,000 of these stories.
yeah, and it makes preparing so much easier as a DM when like you have 1,000 things going on in your normal life. You can just kind of sit down and play because the prep is like non-existent for those games.
Have a few things prepared, and the rest will all come up as we go.
Right. Yeah, we're currently on well, I don't know when this podcast will be out to the public, but if it's out before the end of the month, we're currently playing Happiest Apocalypse on Earth, which is a Powered by the Apocalypse game. And it's basically a haunted theme park. And we've been doing that for like the Halloween season. And I'm really glad for that, because I just show up to game and we just do something, and I may have an idea, I may not. I usually start out the game by asking, like, so this is where we were last week, and kind of here's the thread that of story that we didn't resolve. What do you guys do? And then I just play off of whatever they say. And it gives me a lot of time in my week to, draw comics and like do other things than worry about preparing for a role-playing session.
I really like the ones that are player directed like that. You're kind of guaranteed to follow leads that are genuinely interesting to the players too.
Mhm.
If they, if you throw out several things and they latch onto one of them as the thing of interest to them, then you're not left wondering, well, which of these will they be interested in? Oh no, they've told me. Perfect. Well, that one's now more important than these other ones.
Yeah, exactly. It's like like one of the episodes of that show, the two of the characters are guests in the park and two of the other characters are workers at the park. And like they were like, we need, we want to turn this mascot's head into like a gas mask bong. Like, where can we find pipes and glass and like things to make a bong? I was like, I don't know, but I had this idea for like a cool like mirror house kind of thing, like a haunted mirrors where like you like see like repeated versions of yourself and all that kind of. And I was like, the House of Mirrors has glass and pipes holding up the mirrors. Yes, go here. And then they were just, being tortured by like, I think it was like everyone saw their own version of Shaggy from Scooby Doo, and he was like trying to like lead them astray while they were like getting caught in like the mirror world and like seeing themselves repeated like 100 of times, all that kind of stuff. Pretty fun. Pretty good
Sounds like a
stuff.
wonderful nightmare scenario of, distortion and and helping lead them astray in various numerous and interesting ways.
Yeah, and then I always like to have at least one NPC in every game that I play with a really annoying voice to make it even worse for them. And so the whole time they're like hanging out with a guy who talks like this, like, oh man, like, where's my dog, dude? And it's like, that doesn't get old after a while at all. That's a joy to listen to for 2.5 hours of gameplay.
It's always disturbing when you put in an NPC that has like a voice that's not especially easy for you to do. And that is, of course, the one they latch on to. Oh,
Right.
so I need to be talking like a mole person with the gap between their front teeth this whole time. I enjoy whistling at the end of each word. This will be great. This won't chew up my voice at all.
Yeah. Do you have any like maybe, and then maybe the mole person is the specific example, but do you have any like interesting NPCs that have gone that way for you before?
Oh, geez. Numerous. None currently, which I'm deeply thankful for. I had one that had like the terrible horse voice, like horse voice that like doing that for like minutes on end. Yes, they'll bring it to you. Like that by the end
Yeah.
of like a 3-hour session, you're like, I can't do the voice. I can't. It's
Yeah.
making me hoarse.
Yeah, there are definitely some times when I've had to like give up on a character voice for that very specific reason. Um yeah, I'm trying to think of like voices like players have latched onto. It's almost the opposite for me. I almost like do voices that my players hate and then like just never want to interact with that specific character ever again. Like
That's comparative joy to the other option.
it is. I love it. I love torturing my players. Whenever we play like specifically D&D, I always at one session, I just in case I find a group that actually likes the character, because I like it. I think it's funny, but a lot of people seem to hate it when I have this like broken, like semi-broken modron, like a monodrone, like traveling salesman. And he talks like this like the whole time as he's trying to sell them things, and they hate it. They hate it a lot because it takes so long for him to say anything. But I think it's funny, and it provides character to this broken robot character.
I've gotten cheers for when one person hated a particular like bad voice, and the other players thought that was just great. So you started on it, and the one person's eyes narrow, and everyone else cheers.
Mhm.
Oh no, it's the voice. Yes, it is. We love it. I hate it.
Man, those moments are the best, right? It's like you have the one person like in the group who always tells puns, and like one person that likes puns and everybody else that hates puns, and the fact that everybody else hates puns makes like the two people that like it love it even more. It's like whatever
It's a
that
bonding
is.
experience.
Mhm. Oh
I don't know. I
man.
played one game where it was a more free form system, and someone was using rhyming magic as their preferred form of magic. So
Oh.
so they had to say poems that involved a lot of juvenile and childlike rhyming anytime they wanted to cast, which some people loved and some people hated. And for some reason, they decided that chum was a very easy word to rhyme with. So
Yeah.
lots of disgusting fish based magic going on.
I was gonna ask, like, did they have to rhyme in a way that like was related to the thing they were trying to do, or vice versa? Would like a spell turn out to be more like what they rhymed?
Oh yeah, the spell was definitely related to the rhyme. I think in one notable scene, I could still remember the very bad chum based rhyme, which was chum chum fishy scum, dump a bucket on the spum.
Oh, no.
And then that was used, of course, to dump a bucket of chum on someone so that they could then use it as a distraction for some other shenanigans.
Hmm. Man, were they I guess when ad-libbing a rhyme like that, it is good to have like a word like chum that is easily rhymed. I've attempted to do something similar, but not like rhyming. There was a character I did that I basically just translated all of the spell names into Latin. But that was something that I could prepare ahead of time. Like I wasn't trying to ad lib that.
The ad libbing did not make it easy. I don't suggest trying to be the rhyming orange mage. That would be exceedingly difficult.
I mean, some would say impossible.
All your rhymes involve orange and door hinge, and that's a half rhyme at best.
Right? All of your spells are only half potency because of it's a half rhyme. um but oh, there was something I was gonna ask. Oh yeah. When it came time for you to like get into the sort of selling of like D&D maps and things, like what was the sort of process to like get on roll 20 and um start the ball rolling as far as like the business end of that is concerned?
That was definitely a bit of a process. Initially, I was just doing a light commission work for various people was the start of it, but you could do that along with like another full-time job and whatnot, so that wasn't so bad. But eventually, one of the people I did commission work for suggested, that I should check out Roll20 as a potential place to sell. And Roll20 was very new at that point. There wasn't a ton of artists there yet. So it was two of the biggest ones were quickly, as far as production went, me and Devin Knight. I'm sure you've seen his stuff around too. And
Yeah, I think I
another,
own some of his stuff.
yeah, he does amazing token work. He has a much better art background than me for it, being a graphic designer. He has a I love all the new stuff he puts out. It's always fun to see. But so I did the thing back then was you directly contacted Roll20, which back then their team was pretty much the people that founded it. Nolan was, I think, the point of contact for all marketplace stuff, and it only kind of came out monthly. There was no weekly updates or anything, and you kind of had to put it all in yourself in this laborious process. So if you go back to my very earliest sets, you'll note that they do not contain as much content because it used to take hours just putting it in.
Right.
Or the system improved off of that. I thought I'd just be doing it very part-time too. I didn't think much of it at first. And then, the first month I actually made, a couple $100 off of it, which, was way more than I expected for I can do this for a few extra bucks. It'll be good. It's like, oh, I could do something with this. And I'd like to, because this stuff's really fun to produce.
Yeah.
But I determined that I could not both do a full-time job and get that going at the time. So I decided that I'd make a go of it and I'd take a part-time job. And the one I actually went with was washing windows at the Seattle campus of NOAA, which is partially based in giant World War II aircraft hangars. So washing the windows on those was an interesting process. So that's what I did to make Vince eat. Well, it would be a terrible job to do, for years, but as far as a job to do for a few months to help make ends meet while I get other things going, it was actually really fun. A lot less stressful than cooking. Just windows.
Yeah. I guess, in in comparison to being in a kitchen, like in a working kitchen of a restaurant or something like that, it would probably be much more pastoral of a job.
Very relaxing by comparison. There's little time pressure aside from clearly wanting to, get the job done quickly rather than taking forever, but no one screams at you. And if you're half an hour, it takes half an hour to wash a particularly troublesome set of windows, then it just takes half an hour. There's no one that's, waiting half an hour for their terrible order.
Yeah.
You've made the worst possible order. There's no way I can produce this quickly. But you don't know that because you are not as professional cook and you shouldn't have to be. So here we are.
Right. So when you took the plunge, obviously you had the window washing thing to make ends meet, but what was that like to sort of just say, I'm gonna go for it, right? I've talked to a lot of artists, and I think a lot of the listeners are creatives in their own right. And one of the things we like to talk about here when we do have creative people on is sort of that transition from what we would say the normal blue collar job or whatever, sort of what people the 9 to 5, right, to the artistic thing. Did that take off really easily for you, or have you had to go through and do lots of promotion and all that kind of stuff?
I thankfully just got there at a really lucky time as the marketplace isn't as big as it is now. And
Mhm.
Roll20 took off and kind of pulled me along with it. So that went very easy for me, just out of pure good luck on my part. No particularly intelligent planning or anything. I didn't make good decisions. I just made a decision and someone else made
Mhm.
good decisions that made it work.
Hey,
So that was
nice.
that was a bit of serendipity. Right place,
Yeah,
right time.
I had planned on like doing some stuff for the Roll20 marketplace. I never got around to doing it because the things that I was producing at that time were still very much like me learning how to like do digital art and stuff. And I go back and I look at my sort of like deck of many things that I had designed back in the day, and I'm like, oh god, that's so terrible. I'm so glad I never put that up on the marketplace.
I don't know.
But
There's definitely the don't look back pillar of salt effect for some of it. I look back at some of my earliest work and I would not put it out now, but on the small marketplace that was there at the time when there just wasn't much available and the
Mhm.
level of professionalism wasn't as high as it is now, it was fine at the time. Looking back now from the current perspective, it is no longer fine. But that's generally how it's kind of both the curse and blessing of the artist is you
Yeah.
will get better continually, and you will look back at your old work and you will hate it.
Yep.
Which the blessing is that you're continually getting better, and that's like a true joy to see your progression. But looking back at the stuff previously is always cringeworthy.
Hmm. Yeah, I've always heard that as like the artist's curse, right? Is you get better through practice, and simply by doing art, you are technically practicing. So it's like you always kind of look back at the thing you just finished and you're like, man, I could do that better. And even if you did the best that you could do at the time you were doing that piece, you can do better once you have finished it because you've practiced that much more, right?
You know exactly what went into making that piece and how it could improve.
Yep.
And if you made that improved version, you could then make a better version, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's this positive feedback loop.
I'm thankful in that, like, part of the joy for me is the process, not just the product. So that
Right.
part has a strong incentive to just continue to do the thing that's super enjoyable. And if the product, the process produces something good, then you can put it up for market. Every now and then you try something, you look at it and say, no, I don't think so. Maybe I'll try that same theory again sometime later when my skills have developed more. I've definitely had things that I waited basically a couple years before I tried to produce after making an initial attempt. I don't appear to have the skills for that, and I'm not sure what those are, but I'll try again in 2 years and see if I do then. Oh, I did. I apparently learned something in the meantime. Who knows what?
Yeah, I definitely find it interesting for like when you say you look back at some of the early stuff and how like you wouldn't put it out today. I'm on Roll20 right now looking at some of this, at least what I think. Well, I guess, do they organize things by, yeah, sort by newest. Okay.
Yeah, you can
So
you can definitely sort by newest.
yeah, so I'm looking at this like some of these things, and like Quick Encounters Desert Lands, for example, is one of the early ones. And I'm like looking at this stuff and I'm like, and one of the things like I've always said to people when I mention you, like if they're like trying to look for, stuff on Roll20 is like you seem to have had a very consistent style throughout the whole like your whole career on Roll20. You could use like any of like the trees and bushes and various other things, right, throughout any of the sets. And I would think like you could still do that going all the way back to like these early sets, like I can see where like you've refined like your specific style and like, maybe updated some like patterns and like some texture work and stuff. But I mean, coming from somebody who like has tried to do things like this and just cannot figure out how to make it look good, I'm just like, yeah, no, I still like this early stuff just as much as I like anything else.
I think it's the difference between being the artist who produced it and like stared
Yeah,
at stared at any individual piece for like hours and hours, and someone just looking at it and looking over and say, well, that looks pretty good. That's great. If you've spent 8 hours staring at the same thing, every little thing you didn't do as well just reads so much more to you
true.
than if you're a customer looking at and saying, well, that's totally great for my game, that works perfect. Perfect, it's imperfect, just ask me, I'm the artist.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess I am sort of on the other side of it, like when people, tell me like, "Oh man, that like, first comic you did, man, that's so good." I'm just like, "No, it's terrible. Like I can do so much better now." I guess as I am sort of on the other side of that, in this conversation of like, "No, man, it is good. It's so good. Like, why are you saying it's not? It's so totally good." um, but yeah, so just as an example, right? Like you talk about like spending like a couple hours on something. Like how long do you say it would take you to do like something like an individual set piece like a barrel or a crate or like a bed or something like that? Like how long do you spend on like those sorts of assets?
That varies heavily. Some things I do entirely in Photoshop, and other things I produce in Blender.
Hmm,
And if I do it in Blender, I expect both to make a normal version and a broken version once I have all the pieces made. So in that case,
okay.
I know I can take a little longer because I'm going to get multiple art pieces out of the one initial construction. So
Okay.
it varies anywhere from, a few minutes for things that happen to be really quick to, hour or two for like a barrel that is adequately detailed for my liking, which is probably
Mhm.
pointless at the scale it will be viewed at, but that's never stopped me before.
See, I really enjoy the level of detail you put into, things like a trap door or like up the barrels or whatever. Is I've used some of the stuff in our stream games, and for like the audience perspective watching, I'll zoom in fairly close to the battlefield so they can see like character tokens and monster tokens clearly, and having that extra level of detail in the map I think really adds to like the stream's production value, and I don't have to do any work other than paying you for the art that you've already done.
Yeah, it's always like a question of how much detail to add for like two reasons. I mean, one, detail looks beautiful, and you want to sell people things that are beautiful and will add to, their enjoyment of the game. But the other one is the question of how much they're going to read into it, their players,
Mhm.
because you don't want to give a bunch of details that don't actually apply to someone's game and have
Right.
the characters focusing on those. So you want this strange combination of beautiful detail yet somewhat generic so that they can't read too much into it. And I
Yeah.
I do
Yeah.
okay on that. Certain times based on comments I get, I realize that I haven't maybe, hit the exact note I wanted to with it, where it's like, okay, it needs to be oddly detailed yet oddly generic so that it can be useful in a lot of games, that the players don't get caught up on weird details like and what have you. So that part's fun, and sometimes also just adding pointless details that won't affect a game can be something that the GM can then use for inspiration. These are a lot
Right.
of decorative floor tiles on this map. Yes, I wonder which are trapped. Oh no.
Yeah, I'm exactly. I'm actually working on a I still haven't figured out exactly how to describe this. But it's a like competitive like dungeon crawl show that I'm trying to put together.
Uh,
It's like the D&D version of like Ninja Warrior, basically. So like
gotcha.
you would make teams of 4, and then you go into the dungeon, fight monsters, solve puzzles, avoid traps, etc. Various things. You get a high score at the end, and other teams go in and try and beat your high score, basically, right? And I was using some of your maps to like build out this dungeon, and I was using like the Storm Temple, I think it is. And in those maps, you have like these sort of basins and like these stone spheres. And I put like the 30 by one of the 30 by 30 maps in there, and like attach some of the 15 by 15 maps like to build out a larger complex. And simply for the fact that you gave in the temple map set the stone orb on its own and the basin on its own, I was able to reconstruct the plinths in like this main sort of chamber so that they look like what you had already done on the map, but now those orbs are like movable. And like the idea is that you take those 2 orbs and like you take them to other basins, and like they charge up like a thing to unlock a door, right? So you can move throughout the dungeon. And like
Nice.
literally had no idea what I was doing. I was just like, I need 5 things. I just need 5 dungeons. And you had storm, water, ice, earth, and fire. And I was like, cool, I'll buy those and we're going to see what we can do.
I love taking inspiration from art. I mean, I don't think there's any GM that has not like leafed through a book and like decided to include something just because of the artwork, you know. Oh my God, look at that creature. I'm using it. I have to use it. It's so cool looking.
I
Or,
do
you
that all the
know,
time.
oh, that map. I see a thing on there. That gives me an idea. Yeah, that'll be good. So I think all of that is, you know, the maps definitely. I try to construct them with some natural or sensical flow at times. Cities are some of the hardest to do just because of the amount of, you know,
Yeah.
details in them. And the other thing is I try to design them like real cities. And real cities never get built all at once unless you're talking about like a brand new frontier city or a colony.
Right.
Instead, they always develop over time. And anyone who's lived in a house that was, you know, made any amount of time ago knows that house has been modified numerous times. If you live in an older house, sometimes it's been put through numerous different tasks. What is this? Well, it's a house now, but it used to be, you know, a hospital before. And before that, it was that part of it was the stables, but this was a big house. And so I try to include, you know, levels of that. And when I make things where, you know, some of the things don't make sense if you look at it in the why would anyone immediately build that all just like that? That doesn't make any sense. Yes, but anyone who's lived in any actual cities of any age knows that a lot of that stuff doesn't make sense. If you look at it only in the immediate, you have to think back what it was used for, you know, some time ago before it all begins to make sense. Oh, I
Yeah.
see. This wasn't that, you know, 50 years ago. Of course, it has a weird stone garage attached to it. It was originally a brewery, and that was, you know, where they kept the cold goods and other things like that. And I try to basically build up a certain amount of narrative for what it was before and what it is now. And that doesn't won't always show, but the thought and the complexity that goes into it, I think makes it look more realistic and act more
Yeah.
realistically, even if, you know, that narrative is going to be lost without explanation.
Yeah, like it feels lived in, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have like, are you just pulling from like your own life, having like lived in various cities and places around? Because I know you mentioned earlier about like moving here and there. Or like, do you do specific kind of like research into that? Because that's a thing that I've tried to do in my own world building, like when it comes to like dungeons. Like even this one specifically, right, is an old dwarven city that people have turned into this sort of like adventurers like contest area, right? And I keep thinking like, well, what would it have been like as a city? And like what, like that was my original thought process, was like, as a city, what would these areas have been like? And then how do you change that to be this like dungeon crawl thing? And I got very confused and overwhelmed by it, and I was just like, you know what, I bet Gabe has something cool, and I'm just gonna go and buy something and make this a lot easier on myself.
I've done research on some things, drawn from experience on others. How much research I do is probably partially a factor of how fun that research will be to do.
Hmm.
Oh, I want to look at, 80 pictures and read, a Wikipedia hole for like half a day on that specific subject. That sounds interesting. Versus the ones, oh, well, this is a lot of names and dates, and that bores me.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's for fantasy. So I think, taking inspiration from and determining that this isn't the real world and that's fine works out good for many things. So I don't worry about, inaccuracies. And I think the other truth of it is some people want a version of it from imagination, because these are games of imagination. And
Hmm.
you can basically try too hard to make a version that is quote unquote realistic. And what people are picturing is not the realistic version, it's a fantasy version that they've seen elsewhere. And that's actually what they want. Do
Right.
they want real Egyptian houses? How many 10 by 10 huts can you really put along a road? And you can barely move in them by traditional D&D rules and other things, because you
Yeah.
have four total spaces. That won't be fun. Instead, I'll make something that's 5 times the scale of anything realistic, because you can actually run fun games in it. And that's kind of what people are picturing anyways. They're not picturing the original historical version. So why,
Right.
make something that isn't really what they're looking for anyways, to satisfy accuracy for a game with wizards?
Yeah, I always feel like I get too bogged down in, like, at least in my planning phases, like when I do plan things. And I think it's actually why I've taken to just not planning things in general. But I always get really bogged down in the idea of not necessarily realism to like historical accuracy, but like realism within the setting, you know?
Yeah,
And
internal consistency.
yeah, and I get like really kind of, I wouldn't say like obsessive about it, but I do put probably too much energy into those kinds of things. Like I was mentioning with like, this was a dwarven city, but now it's like an adventurers contest area. At the end of the day, like you were saying, people just wanted to like look cool and like have a good time playing in it, right? And so does it really need to look and function as like what an actual, in air quotes, an actual dwarven city would have been like? Like, no, it doesn't. It just needs to be fun and interesting.
Yeah, finding the balance of you having fun and the players having fun is also important. And sometimes you need to do a little bit of obsessive and over the top world building to entertain yourself. Other times that's just going to drive you mad. As far as which situation is which, if I could identify those, I'd be a lot wiser than I am.
Right. these are the things that when we're 80, we'll like look back on and be like, oh, it was so simple this whole time. We were overthinking it our whole lives. Oh man.
Overthinking is the real danger.
That's a trap that I fall into all the time. Another sort of one of my standard questions that I ask creative people is, do you have any advice for up and coming folks who may want to like get into the sort of same field as you, in this case, doing like RPG, maps and that kind of stuff? Like, is there anything that you've learned along the way that you wish you knew before, either in the actual production of the art or the business end of things?
Oh, absolutely. Number one, before you get going, just practice a lot. It's easy to enter early in hopes of making your amateur efforts pay some dividends, and that's not a horrible thing, but it's probably too early. Put in some real practice before you decide to go commercial. One of the reasons why my work looks fairly consistent is I did that. I have hundreds of practice maps I did when I would determine that I wanted to do it commercially. That I burned through just tons of them, tried different things, and got the practice in enough that I could be fairly consistent once I began producing. That's my first piece of advice. Second, do some research. It doesn't take that long. Go on to Roll20, type in, various search terms for the kind of things you want to make. Look at what other people are producing. Look at the amount they give you and the cost of that amount of artwork you're getting. Ultimately, it might have taken you a long time because you haven't practiced for speed, but they're going to be comparing it to other artists, not just how quick you personally can do it. Mm-hmm. So it's a good idea to, do a little bit of research, spending, an hour or two searching terms for different things and looking what's available is an amazing amount of research effectively, because you can learn a lot in a short period of time. And there's worse things to do than look at a bunch of, cool RPG maps for a couple hours and write down price points.
Right.
Once you've done those two things, understand that you're not going to be super successful right away, even if what you're producing is absolutely amazing looking. One of the things people are looking for is the ability to keep a consistent art style in their games. Not everyone, there's certainly people that don't care, but there's a good number of people who do. So until you have a decent stock of art and they've seen your name often enough, chances are your sales aren't going to be through the roof or anything. So be patient and keep making things. They'll sell better the more you have, for both the reasons of people being able to find it and people being able to keep a consistent art style in their games. And keep enjoying it. If you're going to produce it enough to make it really profitable, you're going to have to enjoy it. So don't make it totally unenjoyable for yourself, because art is not usually one of those things that's instantly profitable enough to be worth doing. If that's your only goal, is to make the maximum amount of money in this world, art probably isn't for you.
Yeah, you can say that again.
On the other hand, if your thing is you want to do something you actually enjoy and eventually make it profitable, that you can do with art.
Indeed. Yeah, I'm definitely in the camp of wanting that consistent style. And I think what you said about having like a big library of stuff and having like going hand in hand with that, your name popping up more in searches and people seeing your name more and more is definitely something that I think led me to always search your name when I'm looking for something, right? Is I know you have a good product. It will be consistent with the other things that I've done. And at some point I noticed that I kept buying your stuff because I liked it, and yeah, it eventually went from a let's see what they have for X search result to now I search your name and then look for it. Do you have something that I need? And if not, then I like default to a search term, right? But when you talk about prolific artwork and having a volume, you certainly have a lot of stuff on that marketplace. And I think, almost never have not found what I need or something that would work when looking at your artworks. Can only maybe remember like one time that I was like looking for like something specific that I didn't find, but I can't even remember what that was now. But yeah.
Give me another couple years, I might get to it.
Speaking of getting to things, any sneak peeks? Like what do you got going on right now? If you can say, I don't know if you keep
Oh,
these
I'm not under
wraps.
any sort of DMC, so the next thing I'll have coming out immediately, which is useful but a little bit boring perhaps, is a set to basically put a green fog all over a map. So if you want to have, poisonous green fog that you can't descend into, or that's, creeping from the forest or something like that, that's what it's intended for, is to, make inaccessible areas and whatnot. It's, one of those construction sets that does a thing well, but you can't look at 300 pieces of green fog and stay very excited. It's utility, it's not excitement.
Right.
But that one, I just finished up the artwork. I need to do everything that makes it so I can actually sell said artwork still. But and the one I've just started, before I bother to do the boring part on that, like a good responsible artist, is another castle. This one's kind of a tall, dark themed one, about
Nice.
30 by 30, so a mid-sized castle, not super tiny, not super big.
Okay.
Uses some of the same textures and other things I used in my Dark Cathedral, because those are particularly fun to work with and seem very Halloween-y. So
Cool. Yeah, I'll look forward to seeing those when those come out then. When we get to the end of this show, we like to go over to our Patreon members area of our Discord. People can ask questions if they go over to patreon.com/Volsham_art. For as little as $1, you'll get access to the members only Discord area, where I will go to first for the listener submitted questions. But we do have a public forum as well for just anybody who's in the Discord community. Links will be provided wherever you find links on these podcasts. This week we have a question which I think is fitting for this episode. This comes from Patreon supporter Dion, and the question is, when was the last moment that you were impressed by your own work?
That's a good question. I occasionally look and I'm super pleased with like one weird little piece, but sometimes those moments are both fleeting, and the individual thing you're really happy with is extremely minor in the grand scheme of things. What did I recently produce that I was very happy with? I should look at my work. Maybe that'll spark an actual memory, because I don't have one much. Man, probably my undersea caverns. I just did those, 4 or 5 sets ago. And I was just really pleased with the level of layering I could achieve for the sea life. I put like the final layer effect that made it look underwater on, and it all like popped. And but it was just, wow, I did a great job. It also, anytime you do too good a job, feels like someone else must have done that. Who did that? That's wonderful. Oh, that was me. Well, that doesn't seem likely, but accidents happen.
Yeah, I really like the sand texture. That sort of like subtle waviness in the sand texture on this set. I'm looking at it on Roll20 right now. I think for me, Mr. Dion, I think for me, it's not necessarily the actual work, but I'm currently, as of this recording, and probably as it comes out, working on an 84-page fantasy noir graphic novel, and I've, I guess the word's been impressed. So yeah, it's not. I think it's some of my best work when it comes to like faces and things like that. But I've been going faster on this book than I ever have before, which I'm impressed by. Last year in October, I did my first 22-page book in 27 days. I was trying to do like just your standard comic book size in a month because I was like, that's what the professionals do, right? I gotta get a book a month done. And so I did. That was the first time I challenged myself to do that. Today is we're recording this on October 19th. Just to give the listeners a sort of metric here. And after we're done recording, I'm going to be starting page 29 of this 84 page book. So I've definitely beaten my fastest record before, and I think I'm pretty impressed with myself about that.
Does it
So
feel like you're doing the work sometimes? Sometimes, like if it gets too good, it feels like either A, an accident, or B, maybe someone else did this. This doesn't seem like me. Do you ever get that
um
impression?
yeah, I've had a few moments of like, oh man, where did this come from? Um nothing recently. Um it was a lot more when I was still trying to like, in air quotes, find my style, because I would do something that like jumped up a level, right? Like we would say like you leveled up, right? And like in those moments I was like, man, did I really do that? But then over, the next month or so, that level sort of becomes my new baseline, right?
Oh
um
yeah, I know that feeling.
yeah. And so yeah, but I haven't had a moment like that. Probably for like a year. I haven't felt like the sort of, man, did I really do that panel or something? But yeah, I definitely have felt it in the past. Yeah.
Always kind of a strange sensation. I do
Yeah.
like that feeling. It's one of the things I think is wonderful when you have the time to very fully commit to something is sometimes you reach a point where your vision of how you're working gains a new clarity in a way that didn't come clear to you when you were doing it at less of the time. I've had that experience in both art, restaurant works, and other things where like suddenly the flow of it all becomes evident to you in a way it wasn't before, versus just like
Yeah.
piecemeal parts of it.
Now that is definitely something that I've noticed on this book. We talked a little bit earlier about workflow and things. Um, that is definitely something that I have found the sort of like things starting to click a little bit more. I noticed that I can do more pages like more quickly if I pencil those pages first and then go back and ink them. Like my typical workflow before this comic was to do all of my layouts, so like stick figures and basic scene blocking, right? And then I would go back, I would do the pencils so that I would draw the actual people in their costumes, kind of rough sketch and like backgrounds and stuff. And then I would like do that, right? I would do that and then ink it, so it looked nice. Then I would go to the next page, do the pencils, and then ink it. The next page, pencil, ink, back and forth. But I've found that like now, if I'm in that construction mindset of like worrying about perspective and making sure that the scenes are all like set up and that I have all the different like, you know, the weird little metal spike that you put receipts on the desk, and like the in out box and the telephone and like the secretary's intercom and like the stack of folders, and like, you know, if I'm in the mindset of drawing those things and I do it across like 2 or 3 pages of a scene, that is sort of like I get into that motion, right, of like doing that part of it, and then I can switch gears and go into the inks, which is basically like tightening up all those lines and tracing out to make it look really nice and pristine. And I can be in that mindset and I can do 2 or 3 pages in a day rather than having that sluggish lag in the mental aspect of, oh, I was just polishing something, but now I got to switch back to construction, and then back and forth kind of slows me down a little. And that was something I just learned about myself over the last 2.5 weeks of doing this book since the start of October.
It's a fun process. Do you find that you gravitate towards certain times of day to do certain parts of or certain tasks within like art? Like I feel like in the morning, my brain is sluggish, but also detail oriented. So if I'm going to do something, you know, that's more about craftsmanship than artistry, I usually try to do it early in the day. And if I want to get more creative, I'm at my most creative, but also most flighty near the end of my days. So that's when I'll try to pick those tasks out if I can. So like you, sometimes I do the same part for multiple things all at once and then go back to a different part that,
Yeah.
you know, better lends itself to my current mindset at a later time.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty much the same. More detail oriented and a little bit sluggish more in the morning. So I like to get up, you know, have a quick breakfast and then get to work by, you know, 10:30, 11 in the morning. You know, an hour and a half after waking up. And then I like to do the pencil stage then, because that is a lot of more precise detail work. Whereas like inking, you know, you want to have like those nice quick fluid movements, so you need to be a little bit more awake and warmed up to do that. And then sort of at night, if I continue to work at night, I'm typically writing, which is the sort of, you know, spaghetti at the wall, see what sticks kind of phase of this like the more creative aspect, right, is like inventing those stories to be drawn later on. Yeah, so I definitely sort of follow that same path of details in the morning and more creative later at night, for sure.
That took me a little bit to figure out that that was, you know, what I wanted to do, because I'd be trying to do the wrong process for the time of day, figuring, you know, well, this is where I am next in this process. I'll continue at it in a basic and linear way at all times. No, I'm
Yeah.
just not getting it this morning. What's wrong with me? Oh, wait, I can do this other part really well in the morning. Why don't I do that?
Yeah, this is my 5th year doing comics. Having done a couple of different issues when I was still in school, and then 2021 is my 3rd full year working as an illustrator out of school. And I'm only sort of just now figuring that out, like on this project. Like, and I'm always like iterating on it. I've talked to like artists before about or like artist writers about like how do you do like this part of it, you know? And a lot of us seem to have this like, well, it kind of changes every time. And I think I'm starting to nail down a specific sort of um like method for like scripts. Like this is a thing that sticks out in my mind. Like when I first started, I did like what they call the Marvel method, where like Stan Lee back in the day, because he was writing like 17 different books or whatever, would write like a paragraph or two for what the issue was about, hand it off to an artist that he trusted to be able to tell the story visually, and say, okay, this is supposed to be, 32 pages. Give me 32 pages off of this script. And then whatever like wasn't clear visually, he'd go back in and write the captions and dialogue at the end, right? Otherwise, it was just like a paragraph or two of the main plot points of the story. And I started out doing that. And nowadays, I typically break my scenes down into like pages and panels. And then it's hit or miss if I actually do dialogue in the writing or if I wait on dialogue until after I have my pages laid out. This project's a little atypical for me because I took a movie that's in the public domain and converted it from your standard noir into this like fantasy version of it, with like orcs and elves and stuff. So for that, my writing process was like verbatim copying down what the dialogue in the movie was. And then now it's like I put those passages on the page and I'm like, oh, that's a lot of words and it doesn't fit in this panel. Let me edit this. And that's sort of what my current process is. But I think moving forward, I'm getting ready to do a 10 issue graphic novel of 25 page issues. And I think for that, I'm actually going to try and write the actual dialogue before actually drawing it, for various reasons. But I think chief among them is I kind of liked having the dialogue done because I can just copy and paste it onto the pages, and I don't have to worry about like figuring out the page like line breaks and all that because it's already done for me in copy and pasting into the word balloon itself. I think it's just easier.
I'm glad I never have to do anything with writing. My writing is not my number one skill.
Yeah, it's definitely takes a while to like get your head around it. I've always had narratives in everything I did. Even when I was a kid playing with action figures, there was always a storyline behind their motivations and stuff like that. And then when I was in like bands in high school, like my songs weren't just like party party party, drink drink drink. Like no, it was like actual like verse chorus story structure kind of things. And then I think I mentioned earlier, like I went to film school, so yeah, I'm taking like all that stuff and putting it into comics now.
You were preparing for this moment whether you knew it or not,
right? So yeah, Dion, that was the last moments that we were impressed by our own work. I think we answered the question. Maybe
I think we did. we just gave some additional details after the fact.
Yeah. And remember, listeners, if you would like your question answered on Thought Balloons, you can head over to patreon.com/Folsham_art and sign up for any tier from $1 on up and join our community Discord where you can ask questions to be answered on the show. Last thing before we wrap this up, Gabe, if you would like to let people know where they can find you on social media and buy all of your cool stuff, I'll turn the podcast over to you.
You can find me on Drive-Thru RPG, Roll20, hopefully some other places soon as well. Just type in my name, Gabriel Pickard, spelled like Pickard. And my name should show up. You can find me on Twitter. I should probably look and see what you can find me under. At Gabriel P MC2, or just type in my name and perhaps I will show up.
Fair enough. Thank you so much for being on the show, Gabriel. You're welcome back anytime. And to all of our listeners, we'll see you next time on Thought Balloons.